There is a drought already, it's here. Lots of nor'westers and dry conditions. What should we be looking for as far as stock is concerned?
Yes, there's a few particular problems that I thought I'd bring up with the drying effects that we're seeing lately, and I think it's looking like all the experts are telling us it's going to be a real beauty of a,
It's going to be a long one.
drought. Yeah. So a couple of things that people need to bear in mind that particularly maybe they wouldn't have thought of otherwise. Nitrate poisoning's one, and of course there's a few requirements for plant growth, including grass growth, and one of them is water. And so diminishing water reserves on pasture is going to slow down growth. And once we do get a little bit of growth following a drought or a dry time period, we're going to get a nitrate accumulation that's going to come up through the stem and leaf, and so nitrate poisoning post-drought can be a real concern and one that people should be aware of, and if we do get a little growth spurt in the middle of a dry patch, then it would be particularly important to just keep that in mind and possibly test feed to make sure that the risks are known.
What do? You fill their bellies up with straw or whatever?
There's a number of things that can be done, Rob. Yeah, so limiting time period on high risk feed, making sure they've got ruminal fill before they graze, so they're not going to engorge themselves with toxic plant material. And sometimes actually it may be required that you actually spell that paddock and don't graze it at all, depending on the level of nitrates that we're finding. So
because it's not just brassicas, it can happen in grass as well.
No, it can happen in grass as well. Yep. So, yep, we definitely can see nitrate poisoning in especially high producing cultivars of grass.
Algal bloom.
Algal bloom's another thing to keep an eye on, particularly with dogs. Really, they seem to be very susceptible with water sources drying out. We're getting pooling rather than flowing water, and flow rates dropping. We get these algal mats forming in slow moving water. Can be very toxic, and especially in dogs, as I say, some of these dogs within 20 minutes they're dead. So avoiding access to these where there's these algal mats floating on the top of the water would be particularly important, particularly as I said previously with dogs exposure. They seem to be particularly susceptible.
And ryegrass staggers.
Of course, anytime we're getting a lot of dead matter in the base of the sward, we end up with a good environment for fungal growth. Ryegrass staggers is a classic, caused through a fungal toxin, and again, when we get these dry conditions, very important to keep an eye out for that. So you get the classical off balance, wobbliness, drunken looking effects on the gait or the mobility of stock. Sheep, cattle, horses, all susceptible. Very, very difficult to kill animals with ryegrass staggers, but death often as a result of misadventure, so falling into ditches, this kind of thing, getting tangled in fences, very, very important. Again, minimising exposure, shutting them up, maybe taking them off pasture altogether and hay feeding for a few days to minimise or watch the symptoms dissipate. Particularly important if you're looking at moving stock. You need to be sure that you haven't got the effects of staggers before you start moving stock distances, and of course these are the sort of practices that happen when we're moving stock to good grazing areas or better grazing areas through dry periods.
And of course if you've got a drought, you'll find that the weeds will still grow.
Exactly, so that's another real classic summertime, drought time problem in Canterbury, are poisoning cases, whether it's actually grazing of toxic plants that are growing around yards and things. There's plenty of native species, poro and kawai and all these things that are poisonous, but also if you think that it might be time to trim the ornamentals around the house and leave them in the paddock before until it's a safe time to burn the pile, be particularly aware of what's going on that pile. Actually just 2 days ago we had a number of animals die with yew poisoning, so that's just a classic example of the sort of things to watch out, particularly when we're dealing with ornamental clippings and of course weed growth. Often they're toxic, so just be aware of what the animals are getting access to.
Now, what's salt poisoning in pigs?
Salt poisoning is a good one to bring up through the summer as well. Excuse me. So pigs, if their water source is cut short for any period of time, they tend to continue to eat. And if they become dehydrated with high salt feeds and then the water source suddenly comes back on and they compensate by drinking a lot, we can actually get a syndrome called salt poisoning. It results in dramatic swelling of the brain and brain symptoms, neurological symptoms, very difficult to bring right. So very important in these times of year to ensure that that water is flowing at all times, and pigs are particularly susceptible when it comes to salt poisoning, and summer of course is a major time to watch for that particular problem.
Now, parasites, are they more active in a drought?
Well, it's a sort of a misnomer and a bit of an irony, really. You'd think that when we've got dry conditions, it'd be very, very difficult for parasite larvae to survive, and so you'd think actually getting parasite problems would be rather unusual in a drought. Coming out of the drought, however, we often do see problems. So in the autumn period, after a long dry summer, we always see problems. We think that the problem is twofold. One is the animals that have been stressed, their immunity drops and they tend to pump out lots and lots of eggs, parasite eggs. So we get a very rapid accumulation of infectious larval concentrations on the pasture. And secondly, they're a little bit better than you think at surviving drought conditions within the pat or the fecal bolus once it gets dried on the outside. And so once that fecal bolus is moistened again, we can get larvae hatching that have over summered, if you like, with the protection of the encased feces, and then we get massive numbers very, very quickly, all at the same time. So a huge challenge very quickly to the animals, and we often will see major parasite problems in young stock going into the autumn period after a good autumn rain.
And of course, North Island, you've got facial eczema.
Facial eczema, yeah, and I guess that's akin to staggers. It's the same scenario. We've got lots of dead material at the base of the sward, and of course that's a great environment for fungal growth. And facial eczema, again, a toxin caused through the ingestion of the spores of a certain type of fungus, results in liver damage, liver death, and a consequence of that is photosensitization, so chemical changes within the skin that are sensitive to sunlight. And what we see often, rather than knowing that we've got a damaged liver, ears, tips burning off, and major damage to the skin, particularly the exposed areas of skin around the face and ears.
Yeah, so be very, very vigilant, Nick. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem.